Okay, welcome everyone to our roundtable discussion on leadership that lifts others. It's book 3 for me, and I'm very excited to have you all on board. And just for our future viewers, I'm just going to read your bios so they know who the special people are that I have today. So to my left, I have Perry Lelati, who's an Australian executive leader with more than 25 years of experience in business, financial services and organisational leadership. He has held roles including General Manager, Football and Chief Operating Officer, leading complex programs across competitions, participation and development. Prior to returning to the sports sector, Perry spent over a decade in wealth management and advisory services, earning recognition for his professionalism and client outcomes. A former semi-professional footballer with Perth Soccer Club, he combines deep sporting knowledge with commercial acumen, supported by an MBA from the University of Western Australia and governance credentials as a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. You're very special, Perry. Welcome.
Thanks, Nancy. Makes me sound good.
Carmel Philippe is an organisational psychologist and experienced consultant based in Perth, Western Australia, with over 25 years of experience across government, private and not-for-profit sectors. Up until recently, she was the General Manager of Equal Assurance and operates her own consultancy, specialising in organisational development, leadership and workforce strategy. Her expertise includes change management, performance systems and strategic workforce planning. Carmel holds qualifications in psychology and organisational psychology and is known for her strong facilitation and analytical skills. She has led numerous organisational reviews and supported the design and implementation of leadership and performance frameworks. Carmel is regarded as a trusted advisor who delivers practical, evidence-based solutions to improve organisational effectiveness. Welcome, Carmel.
Thank you, Nancy.
It's great to have you on board. And last but not least is Michael Burgess. Michael is a Perth-based business leader and director at Frog Pond Software, a SaaS platform that connects buyers and suppliers to streamline sourcing across education, government and business sectors. And with a background spanning financial services, education and consulting, he has held senior leadership roles, including long-term bursar at Trinity College and director of his own consulting practice. Michael also co-developed initiatives such as Education Resource Options, helping schools and organisations improve procurement, efficiency and business processes. Welcome, Michael. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much for taking the time to provide your insights on leadership. And you've all read the book. And so I'm open to some feedback in that space. But I thought what we would do is start with our first question. What does lifting others look like in everyday leadership practice? And what I'm talking about is not just intention, but in action. Who'd like to go first?
I'll start, I suppose. Of all things, it's relationships, because you don't have to be family or anything like that. You just have to be concerned and empathetic, considered, and relationships allow you to do that. So you can walk around the office, walk around the school, for instance, and be able to have conversations and have them almost as ongoing conversations, but it gives you a chance of being able to know when you can actually start to lift them to the next levels, to let them motivate themselves as well.
Yeah,
Relationships.
And in your own experiences, Carmel and Perry?
I think that you make a really good point about relationships. That does make a big difference. I think a lot of leaders have had in the past had a mistaken impression that leadership was about advancing themselves personally rather than advancing others. Yeah. And that's held the leaders back as well as other team members. So for me, it's really about empowering and mentoring and supporting your team members to be their best selves, because what happens from that is that not only does that encourage psychological safety, it boosts productivity, and it actually makes the team leader look better anyway. Yes. Yep. So if you surround yourself with good people and then you support and help them to lift themselves as well, it's only going to make the leader look better.
Yeah, I agree with you. Perry, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just having a discussion last week with a few people. It is I strongly believe everything is about relationships first and foremost, and it's critical to keep a humanistic approach to our leadership. And I take it upon myself that the higher you go in an organisation, the more you need to serve the people around you. And I think that touches on your point, where it's less about you as you get further up, and it's more about the people around you.
Yeah, totally agree. So that leads to the second question. So we've talked about relationships, but if we could go a little bit deeper, how can leaders create environments then where people feel seen and they feel heard and they feel valued, especially like times like now where we have great uncertainty and change? What are your thoughts?
I'll continue if you like, guys, and we'll go back the other way. But I think first and foremost, your book touches on it really well, Nancy, that I think presence first and foremost, and not just physical presence. I think you've got to be in the office or you've got to be anywhere around your team, but you need to be available for them to be able to support them through whatever they're going through at that particular moment in time. So I think being available for your team is probably one of the most critical points.
Perry, you talked about being available and being present. That human connection, I think, is a really, really important part of it. It doesn't necessarily have to happen by being in the same space. I work entirely remotely and have done for 6 years or so. Wow. And prior to that, less on a regular basis. But you can still do it in an entirely remote situation. So all of the people in my organisation work remotely, and yet the right connection, that human connection, making sure that you make those connections and that you keep those relationships going is so important, and especially during times of change, because people are naturally threatened by change. None of us likes change, and often the operational effectiveness gets in the way, or the drive for operational effectiveness gets in the way of that human connection. But you can still do it, even remotely. You can still make that connection and build those and keep those relationships going. We have countless media opportunities available to us to do that, and that's the way to do it in this modern age.
Thank you, Michael. Your thoughts?
Yeah, but that actually sounds like that first item, trust, in your book.
Oh, absolutely.
They'd have to trust you, especially on that remote access situation.
Absolutely.
So,
it's really important, actually, because the communication you have may be face-to-face but only via a screen. And as you know, communicating via screens is almost as difficult as communicating via email and text, but because it's the nuances that you don't get.
Yeah, that body language.
The trust is really important.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I've always tried to stay connected by enabling each of the staff to almost feel like they're helping me in a situation. So sometimes I would go in and just ask, I need your help. I don't know how to do this, but we need to get it done. So I think it's going on about that trust is about, making them feel like they are part of the team. I think that's the crucial bit.
Yeah, I think the question was around being seen and heard as well, and that's really important because especially in times of change, people don't feel like they're seen and heard. No, they feel like they're just an element in making things happen. And I think you're right about the trust, but also that sense of psychological safety, which is becoming such a big thing these days.
Sorry, Nancy, I'll just jump in for one more point there, because I think it's incumbent on us as well to be able to have the awareness to see who it is in our organisation that are comfortable speaking up, but more importantly, the ones that are sinking into their shell, because they're the ones that we probably need to pay more attention to. They don't feel comfortable. We need to give them the confidence to do so. And in a room where there's a lot of voices, it's hard for them to do that, and some people may not feel comfortable doing that. So it's up to us to say, tell me what you think. What do you think we should be doing?
And it's really interesting you say that. I was reading a Harvard article, and it was talking about how individuals are struggling or how they adapt rather in their workplaces. And they mentioned a term, agency erosion. So agency erosion for leaders. And what does that mean? It means that they either become passive, where they put their head in the sand, or they become very controlling. So this is the only bit that I control. But for staff, it's also about, we're moving in such a very fast-paced direction, and we're making fast-paced decisions without any tests. So again, it's that agency, I was hired to do this, but now because of where we are at, I'm having to pivot. And so it's so important in this space to have leadership that lifts others. I keep saying that over and over again. It's just so important. So let's talk about self-awareness then, in terms of how it can support and influence a leader's capacity to lead. What are your thoughts in this space?
Well, self-awareness is so important from a perspective of the individual, but also, of course, the people around you, because if you have good self-awareness, then you model the sort of behaviours that you want to see. If you're not already exhibiting those behaviours yourself, self-awareness can help you to see where you need to develop and change and work on your own self. But particularly around the areas of decision-making and fostering empathy, if we want other people to do that and we want to improve our team's performance in those areas, then as a leader we need to be obviously very self-aware of what we're doing and how that impacts those around us. Probably one of the biggest challenges, I would have thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think also is when we're self-aware, we're courageous enough to allow ourselves to be vulnerable to a short extent. I'm not talking about vulnerability vomit. We know Brené Brown speaks about that at length, but this notion of, a bit like you said earlier, Michael, I'm having some challenges with this, or how can we gather to discuss some of these pertinent issues, or what are your thoughts about this? So, it walks away from me and it walks away from you, but it becomes about us.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, Nancy, is that as we know, teams are made up of a number of different people with different skills, and they come from different places. And a very good team is a team that is made up of different people, not all people the same. And so each of those people, including leaders, will have their own strengths and weaknesses, or areas for development, as I like to call them.
Correct.
And so the leader being aware of their own strengths and areas for development will encourage other people to explore theirs as well within the team in a safe environment. And that vulnerability that you mentioned is not so much to take it to the limit, but to say, look, these are the areas that I need support in, as you've said. I can quote an example at the moment. I won't give any specific details, but of a team that I know of at the moment, a very bright young mid-30s, sort of up and coming young man in the business. He currently has a leader who just does not recognise his ability to get things done and is constantly holding him back, because the leader is afraid that his own supervisor will think that they're not getting things done and they're not doing them right, because he can't actually get them done himself. Now, if he was a smart leader, he would say, look, these are my strengths, these are my areas of development. You obviously fill one of these areas that we really need to work on. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. This morning I ran a half-day workshop, and again, no specifics, but I actually had the director involved with the senior leaders working together, and very open in saying, I'm not good at that, or how can we do this better? And it was, I have to say, it was really inspiring, because for me, standing as someone outside of that bubble, he's doing so much to grow and develop the team that he leads, and to emulate this notion of, well, I'm standing here and I'm telling you that I'm not great at this, or we could do this. And again, that just grows their leadership at a subconscious level. That's my thinking anyway. Perry, what are your thoughts?
No, I share that. And I was going to mention something very similar in the circles that, I've been in as well. I think it maybe comes with age and experience. I don't know. When you're younger, you tend to feel a little bit embarrassed by calling something out and saying, I don't know what that means. And I've been in many meetings with people that are far younger than me, less experienced, where they say something that goes completely over my head, and I stop the conversation and say, hey, what's that acronym that you just threw out? I've got no idea what you're talking about. And they all laugh, and that's fine. But I think that's what brings the team together. So the self-awareness piece is, a lot of great things that we've touched on here. And I think, again, reflection is something that I'm trying to get better at as I get older. So I have a one-on-one, or I'll have a meeting with someone, and then they'll leave, and I'll spend a few minutes going, I wonder how that went. I wonder what they thought when I said X, Y, and Z. How did I actually influence that conversation? And how did they leave here feeling that conversation, and was it positive or not? And if, 9 times out of 10, I feel like it goes okay, but I'll always lean on someone else, completely random, inside the organisation or outside, and just ask them for some feedback saying, this is what happened. Do you think I handled that okay? So I think self-awareness, self-reflection as well is something that's pretty big in that space.
I agree with the reflection part, because personally I've had an issue with a situation where you can be self-aware, but I think you can be self-confident as well. And sometimes you think that you're going okay because you're not getting feedback or anything. And in some companies, of course, you have your performance reviews. And here I was, coming towards the end of my time at Trinity and employment, because I'd been nearly 50 years in the workforce, to find that all of a sudden I wasn't getting through or wasn't relating well to the younger group, the millennials, etc. And that sort of shocked me because I thought I had a good situation. So you can be self-aware, self-confident, but you've got to get that feedback and reflect. I ended up doing a course at AIM, of course, how to manage people.
Well, again, speaking of AIMWA, that's where I met Dr. Sean Ridley, and he's a really good mate of mine. And we often speak together because we're on projects together. But I'm going to quote from the book that I quoted him. We were meeting one day talking about future clients and how we were going to grow the leaders in this space. And we talked about perspective seeking. So, what does that look like for you? And if I'm hearing that, how does that make me feel? So the two questions were, how do you experience me as a leader? And how do you experience yourself differently when you are in my presence? And I think that takes a lot of courage to be able to ask, because it's not a response that we may want to hear.
Yes.
But it's really about leading with presence and purpose in that space. And I think if we did that a whole lot more, then that would be better. And I think also think about walking away from what has traditionally been a very transactional approach to leadership aligned with autocracy, and now moving into that consultation collaborative approach, because we see now globally what autocratic leadership looks like, feels like and sounds like. And I'm sure we don't want that in our workplaces.
No, absolutely not.
It's simply not going to work with younger generations anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, you read all the literature and your book's a great example of that, and there's plenty there to suggest that that's not the way to lead.
It's really interesting how it works. All right, next question. Are we ready for it? We don't have to stick to these questions, by the way, but anyway. How can leaders balance accountability with compassion while still achieving strong outcomes? And then I'm just going to add a bit, particularly in an environment that is not that is really uncertain. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I think that's why you put the word balanced in there, because this brought some memories back of, I don't remember where I heard this or where I read this, so if I'm quoting someone and I haven't said their name, I apologise, but it's the difference between being nice and being kind. Being nice is the easy way, telling someone what they want to hear, and, so you're not uncomfortable, so it's all about you. Whereas being kind is actually holding them accountable and telling them something they may not be expecting, and trying to do that in a constructive way.
Yeah, Jacinda Ardern talks a lot about leading with kindness. And that's how she led, and she talks a lot about it, has produced a documentary on it, and has spent some time at Harvard working with students at Harvard trying to really reteach this notion of leadership.
Yeah. I don't think it's about how some people might think the dichotomy of being soft or being tough as a leader. I think that you can bring compassion to leadership without being a soft touch. But it has to be balanced with accountability, and coming, obviously from a performance background as well, I think it's really important to set clear expectations so that people do know what's expected of us. Not unlike parenting, really. Set clear expectations and then listen. Then practice good active listening and empathetic listening, and find out what's going on for that person around those expected outcomes. I think that's where the compassion kicks in. You can give somebody a list of things that you expect them to do, but if they're simply not within their skill set, or they're just not up to doing it at that particular time, or there's something else going on for them which is not obvious, whether that's a health issue, a personal issue or whatever, I think it's really important that we're able to separate the behaviour from the person when we're talking about accountability, and that we can be personal without getting personal.
Yeah.
We can understand what's happening for that person without making it personal. I think those things are really important when you're trying to still ensure accountability, because that's how organisations are productive, let's face it, but still with some kindness.
Yeah, that's the core element of my first book. It's called About It. So we talk about separating the person and the behaviour, which is something we seem to forget to do. We instinctively go to naming, and I sit there going, well, if you're naming, what does that say about the behaviour? What is it that we're actually identifying? Michael?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. In the workforce of schools, of course, you know, everyone's got their role and everyone is expected to achieve those. And although you might have a bursar or school business manager, they're responsible for the finances and the financial team. And so it's an interesting one as far as me being able to answer, because they're each responsible for what they're expected to do. My role is to oversee how that is all performing, and was over 22 years. I don't think there was many times at all that I had to go and have that balance of making people accountable for what they wanted to do. So it's an interesting one for me to try to answer. You know, I think it gets down to just being that, getting back to that relationship, and why I always wanted good relationships was to make it so that there was that sort of trust, confidence in what I was getting them to do, and them automatically trying to meet all of those job routines that they were doing.
So giving, I think it sounds like what you're saying is about creating that supportive environment where people can be accountable and can take ownership of what it is that they're responsible for achieving.
Yeah, I used to say I'm not a micromanager at the end of the day. It was about knowing that everyone knew what their jobs were, they had to achieve it, and if we had a happy environment, well, then we're okay, you know. I remember, if I could sort of bring about a sort of a commentary there, I worked at 3 schools, right? The first one I worked at was a friendly environment. So everyone was working towards a common goal, and the community was a community. Went to the next one, and I still remember the bursar of the day telling me as I was coming in as the assistant, listen to the office, and this is the finance office, listen to the office. He said, you can hear a pin drop, can't you?
Wow.
And he said, the reason for that is one day you're going to have to sack them, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. And I walked into that place, and I think it was a month it took me, and it was happy. It was an environment where everyone was still doing their job, but we were able to have at least some noise and some, you know. So a balance is about the right environment to make everyone know that they know what their jobs are, and you can still have an environment, a good environment.
In addition to that, though, when we think about accountability, sometimes leaders don't like to hold people to account. And I often talk about, you know, it's important to be friendly but not necessarily have a friendship. But this notion of leaders running away from accountability, holding people to account because of whatever consequence it is for them. So that notion of courageous conversations, what are your thoughts about that in this space, to hold people to account?
Yeah, I've had a few of those, but one in particular, the fellow just, he just couldn't control himself. He clearly had some issues, and I knew that clearly there were some issues going on in his life, but he just couldn't control himself. So every now and again he would be almost attacking another worker, you know. So the courageous conversation was to be able to get him in the office and to talk to him about the fact that I I knew that there was some issues that he was facing and had to deal with them, but also that he had to understand that he couldn't keep on doing these sorts of things. So we actually brought in a rule, and the rule was if it happened 3 times in a row, he had to make a decision about what he really wanted to achieve. And on the 3rd time, he actually came in and had a resignation letter. He had come to that situation that he knew that he couldn't keep on controlling himself.
That was a true situation of accountability then, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, he self-analysed that and really gave him a chance for reflection himself, and he made the decision rather than somebody else having to make it on him.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, really valuable.
Perry, can I throw something directly to you in the sporting realm about, how players get very, very passionate, and sometimes an accountability conversation has to take place. What might that look like, feel like and sound like for the person having to connect with that player? You don't want them to lose their passion, but at the same time you're very aware of a behavioural element that needs to be addressed. What would a courageous conversation look like in that space?
Yeah, I go back to the kindness piece and the stuff that my colleagues have been saying here as well. Definitely clarity is, you've got to understand what was said and how it was said and how it affected other people around you. I've been in several conversations where, I still get nervous with those conversations. As you get older, I don't think they get any easier. You just become more experienced, and I suppose the next time you try and do it a little bit better. But it is really about understanding that person for a start, and because there could be other things going on, right? We don't know that. We see the player, or we see the person in the office that comes in and is the secretary, whatever their title is. And that's most times what we see. But, I've been better at obviously sitting back and going, okay, what's happening outside of work? Because we see them for a small period of the day. So I start with that and asking them how things are going, how are you feeling, and then bringing up that particular situation and how what was said, be pretty specific about the things that were said and what everybody heard and how it made other people feel, and I guess the effect it has on the wider team. And just ask them for some feedback on, have you had a chance to think about it? Have you had a chance to reflect on that? And 9 times out of 10 they do. They feel pretty guilty and they do reflect on, okay, maybe I was a little bit out of control. Yeah. And then we start talking about, okay, so if it happens again, what do we do next time? Have you thought about anything else that we can do?
Yeah, no, not dissimilar to what Perry had, or what Michael had said. He, but in a totally different context.
Different context. But I think the same principles apply in a different space.
But you know what I love about that? You acknowledge that, even though you've done this many, many times, it's still a nerve-wracking experience because you genuinely care for people and you don't want them to misunderstand the intention of the conversation. You want the impact to be one of growth and development. But it's important that leaders hear that it's okay to be nervous and it's okay to be uncomfortable with it, but do prepare for that conversation. Make sure you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. You're very aware and being very mindful of what you say and how you say it. But it's important that we understand that those conversations need to be had because the more and more we don't have them, you were right in saying earlier that it's really about people trying to protect themselves to not have those conversations. There's no growth for the other person or the team because then that spreads. When we don't hold people to account, then that spreads throughout the workplace and the conversation is, Michael just, don't worry about Michael, he will say it and then he won't follow through. Yeah. So it's really important when we lift others, leadership that lifts others is also about holding them to account in that space.
Yeah. Nancy, having worked obviously in the HR area for quite a number of years, sort of as an adjunct to that area in organisational development, that's where those conversations end up because those conversations are not happening at the leadership level. So eventually they land in the HR manager's office, and then it becomes a really difficult conversation and difficult not in the sense of not in the sense of what you're saying is a courageous conversation. It's difficult for everybody. It's difficult for the organisation because it hasn't been dealt with.
Bigger consequences.
It's a much bigger consequences by that stage, and it's really quite interesting to see how that happens when people who should be able to deal with it at the leadership level haven't dealt with it, haven't had those courageous conversations, or were not aware, did not have a high level of emotional intelligence, that they were aware of how they responded to a person sitting in front of them and didn't ask the questions like you say, you know, how are you feeling about this?
Yeah.
But I did, having said that, I had I was working once with a very effective HR manager, and she had to deal with some very difficult situations that would eventually end up on her desk. And she was the most empathetic woman. I remember having some conversations with her myself, which weren't particularly comfortable. But she was soft but tough, if I could use that expression again. You know, she was empathetic, she was understanding, but she took no nonsense either, and she resolved issues because of that. She was very highly respected in the organisation, which of course only increased the burden on her because everybody would eventually let it end up on her desk. But
that leads into what you were saying earlier, and I talk about this a lot in the workshops that I facilitate. You have to set very clear boundaries and very clear expectations. And what I often say to people is, you need to teach people how to treat you, but you also need to invite them to teach you how to treat them. Because if you're communicating to them, like, you know, I always say, I think, you know, I recognise for legal reasons that we go through a process of orientation and we have like 14 or 15 2-minute videos to watch about safety and everything else. But because we're so busy doing that, we forget to connect with the people who are joining with us. So I always say, you know, make at least an hour or 2 hours, dedicate time to asking questions like, I might say, Carmel, you know, there will be times where you and I have to have a courageous conversation. What might you want that to look like? Or Perry, you know, there will be times when I need to give you feedback. Tell me how you like to receive feedback. Or it might be something like, oh, Michael, tell me, you know, there'll be times where we want to celebrate the work that you do. How would you like to be celebrated? Because we all know there's no one size fits all in doing that. And the more information we have, it means that when it does come time to have those conversations, we go back to, so remember when we met and we talked about X and you said da, 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 and you go back to, well, this is, I'm going by what you're saying. So it doesn't become about me, it becomes about us working together to mitigate a challenge. And it's through that trust and through that connection, if that makes sense.
So it's more than just knowing about what's going on in their lives, it's knowing about the person themselves.
Yeah,
it's such a minefield, right? We're talking about this, but you think about the amount of people you work with, the different personalities, the different preferences. It's a tough gig to figure
really
it out.
is.
And there's no one way of saying something to every person and them taking it the same way, because there's there's what we say, there's what we mean, there's what they hear and what they feel, right?
Correct.
After that.
Exactly.
So it's just a minefield.
In my earlier days, I used to use the Reframe sandwich.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you've heard it.
Yes.
You know,
I think there's a different name for that sandwich.
You're doing a great job. Here's the problem, but keep up the good work, you know.
Yeah.
So it got you into a pattern of at least being able to handle most of those
How
sort of
effective was that?
It was pretty good. I'm known as someone who constantly smiles. So
Okay. Well, let's move on from then. That we've just talked about helping, working through conversations in that space. So as a leader then, how can we support leaders to be able to mitigate the self-doubt that comes into space and to foster confidence to connect with people? Whoever wants to go.
Yeah, go
As
on.
probably one of the biggest self-doubters in the room, I would say. I'm probably experienced enough to talk about this, and I say that I think there is a positive element to self-doubt if you can manage it and if it's not paralysing. Because, in my own personal opinion, I think self-doubt keeps me grounded. It keeps me humble, and doesn't ever make me walk into a room and think I know more than anybody in this room. So I think to a certain extent it's great if you can cope with the thoughts that are going through your mind at night while you're trying to sleep. But I think reflecting on, in my personal opinion, and doing this with other people as well, reflecting on past experiences helps, because I think we've all been through times where we've been in it and we feel like we're not getting out. How are we going to do this? But invariably, there isn't probably too many things that we've been through that we haven't made it through. So we can figure things out. Leaning on other people is a great example. If I have team members coming to me, with some self-doubt, I often talk to them about my own experiences and how I did some certain things and I failed at them. But then what happens after I failed? I just learned from that and we just move on to the next thing. So I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I expect you to actually make mistakes, and if you're not, you're probably not trying hard enough. Just giving them that confidence to give it a go. And even if, at my age and my experience, if I make mistakes, I still make mistakes. I don't care if you do. I actually encourage you to make them.
You learn by mistakes. Yeah. In mentoring, it's about also giving of yourself. So, self-doubt and all of those sorts of things, you draw on your own history of experience, and the mentee allows them to grow and to think, I'm not the only one, those sorts of things. As bringing new leaders up, it's about listening to their conversations and then asking the questions. And I had one fellow where I asked the question, do you think you're ready to do studies? Why would I be wanting to do studies? Because I think you've got potential, and this is the area that, you need to be looking at. What do you want to be able to achieve? What are the skill sets that you're weak in? Let's start to focus and grow, be it in work or allowing them to go and do studies and things of that nature. So be prepared to answer those sort of questions and foster seeds. I had a principal who we used to go walking every Thursday down the college, and he would always say to me, let's go and sow some seeds.
Oh, fantastic.
Lovely notion.
And the seeds were about going up to someone, just talking about a situation where he wanted them to grab it, with their own desire to grab. And he would sow that seed, and then, you'd walk away and I'd say, what if they don't do anything? Oh, well, that's what seeds do sometimes. They just fritter away and die, So, we used to sow seeds.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's something to be said too for encouraging leaders to challenge negative self-talk, which we all do in our own ways. We all have a little bit of imposter syndrome, I think, and if we don't, we're probably, as you say, we're probably not being entirely honest with ourselves. But I think we need to challenge negative self-talk in ourselves and in others with evidence. And in leadership, you can do that. You have the opportunity to provide the evidence which will challenge any negative self-talk that you see in yourself as well as in other people. So, that's a really simple way of doing it, saying, look, this is, the great work that you're doing here. There's an fantastic achievement there, and the result of that was really, really made a difference to the organisation or the people or whatever. And also breaking things down into small steps and sort of like, it's the how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, so just sort of encouraging confidence that it can be done if it's approached the right way. And as you say, failures are learning opportunities. So, yes, along the way you might choke on a piece of that elephant, but it's not the end of the world.
It is a lot like you said earlier about, bringing up your kids in a way. It's having confidence in them before they see it in themselves.
True.
And holding on to that long enough and just keeping them going until they can see it for themselves. And then, when that does happen, it's quite rewarding.
Yeah.
And it is celebrating the small things that they may think are insignificant along the way, but definitely a step towards greater success.
Milestones are important.
Yeah, they are. But in life, you have to accept that there are going to be times where things are not going the way we like. So I'm often saying, there are two. I look at this notion of reframe. I love the word reframe, hence the business name. But I'll always say, what's working? So there are a list of things that will not be working, but what is working well in that space? So what is there to celebrate? And find the joy in those bits, because it's those little bits that will get you through that arduous list on the other side. But it's quite interesting. And again, I think being surrounded by really good people who don't placate you and say, yes, you're amazing, but who sit there and have honest conversations with you to say, well, what are your thoughts about that? this is what I've seen. This is what I think could be done better. But what are your thoughts? And so, really having a circle. And I recently interviewed Emeritus Professor Gary Martin on my podcast, Show Up and Lead. And he said he has circles of people that surround him, and he's always listening, a bit like you were saying, listening all the time, asking those questions, and then moving in a direction that is appropriate in that space, but using the informed, the power of collective minds coming together on an issue and then making a decision based on that. So that helps that whole imposter syndrome or that self-doubt, because you're hearing the perspectives of other people, which I think is important. But anyway, moving on. Okay, so we've got another question. How does leadership that lifts others contribute to healthier cultures, stronger engagement and long-term success? And I'd love if you have examples of your own personal experiences that you would be willing to share with the public.
Oh, no pressure.
No pressure, no pressure at all.
Oh, dear. I always made a point of, after work when nearly everyone else had gone, of actually writing personal notes.
Oh, great.
And just leaving them on different tables, but acknowledging the work that they'd done, thank you for that work because it really made a difference, and do that sort of thing. And especially make sure that you acknowledge in groups, in presence, so that they know that they've achieved and everyone else knows as well. Or I used to also do breakfasts on the river where I'd cook the bacon and eggs and all that for the staff to just celebrate milestones. And when the old Fokker plane was at McDonald's, we used to go in there from time to time to have a McDonald's breakfast, So to just lift them and celebrate milestones that we all work hard, 9 hours a day, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. We talk about, sort of celebrating those milestones and focusing on the employees or the people themselves rather than just on the organisation. Once again, rather than just on hierarchy and control, which of course is very much the older style of leadership. But we still have a lot of leaders who have that approach, focusing more on autonomy and how people are achieving in their own right, but also and recognising that, both in their performance and in their contribution to the overall organisation. I have a couple of examples, contrasting examples. One was where I actually had a leader who was a senior manager who came into the organisation, and after she'd been there for about a month, she said to me, "I don't actually know what you do here."
Oh, wow.
Or what you're doing here, I think were her words, which was, fairly crushing.
Yes.
I was an OD consultant at the time, and I was quite blown away by that. She proceeded then to completely undermine me, so that was a whole other story. But I have another example where, once again, in this remote environment, where I've seen an amazing manager just really, really build people up without in any way diminishing themselves, and just making the whole place such a safe environment for people to try, to have a go. Another manager in the same sort of situation who gives autonomy ostensibly, but then doesn't necessarily follow through with that. So I've seen that in organisations where I've worked as well. But where you've got a leader who actually builds people up and says, this is not just providing good feedback and saying you're doing great, but giving people the opportunity to really excel and then recognising it.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
makes so
fantastic.
much difference.
Yeah, it
So I think
does.
those two comparisons really show, just how good or how bad it can be.
Yeah. Perry, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we've come back full circle to what we first talked about and how leadership is not about one person. And even, leader, there's a connotation when we say leader that there is one person at the front, but I think it's having the comfort to be a supporting actor in that leadership context, because an organisation is greater than any one person is going to be, and I think we need to understand that when we're in positions of leadership, or even if we're not, and leadership comes from anywhere, right? So I think it's just about the sum of the whole. The sum of the parts, is greater than any one person. I've often said to people, and it always gets mixed reactions, but I've spoken to HR and leaders and teams, colleagues in my team, and I've often said to them, my goal is to make myself redundant from this organisation.
I remember hearing that from a manager way back.
And the reactions I get are varied. They're like, what are you talking about? Are you leaving? You're not redundant. I said, no, what I mean is that I can slip out the back door and nobody even knows that I'm gone.
Correct.
So that's something that I take with me all the time, and with the aim of doing that. Don't know if it's successful or not, but I think that's the opportunity we have as leaders to try and make the organisation better, not just any one person.
Yeah, it's a sustainable performance, isn't it?
It is. Well, that aligns with how I'm going to end this session. On page 225 of the book, I write, I hope this book becomes your companion, your mirror and your map. Let it remind you that leadership is not about being the best in the room. Leadership is about helping others become their best because you were in the room.
Excellent.
I wholeheartedly believe that, and I say now go, lead, lift and just show up. So can I thank you all for joining me today, Perry, Carmel and Michael. Thank you for your contribution, for your insight. Thank you for having read the book. I'm certainly excited to be able to share this recording with the public and give them insights into the book. Is there anything you wanted to say before we end the recording today?
No. Thank you.
All good?
That's about it.
You're
Nancy,
so welcome.
Thank you, and thank you.
Well, thank you again for joining us. Thank you.